There are two voices in our head. One that says, you're not good enough, you messed that up, you should be further by now. And the other one says, that was interesting. That didn't work, but what can we learn from this? One keeps you stuck and the other one builds you. And I think you can guess which one does which. But most of us are letting the wrong one lead. Hey y'all, I'm Sadie, a dancer, mama, and Navy wife. And if you're new here, this is Becoming Her Again, where we talk about rebuilding identity after motherhood, after burnout, after seasons that stretch you so far, you barely recognize yourself. And today, we're talking about something that changed the way I look at failure, at auditions, at motherhood, at my body, at everything. And it's the judge versus the scientist. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. We all have that inner voice. Actually, we have multiple, but for simplicity, we're going to focus on two of them, the judge and the scientist. The judge is the voice that evaluates your worth, whereas the scientist is the voice that evaluates data. The judge says, you're behind, you're embarrassing yourself, you're not as good as you used to be, you should be better, other people are doing this better. But the scientist says, that didn't work. Interesting reaction. What variable can we adjust? What did we learn? What experiment can we try next? Same situation, completely different outcomes. And here's the problem. High achievers are very good at developing a strong judge. Dancers, elite judge, okay? Mothers, elite judge. Entrepreneurs, elite judge, because we were rewarded for high standards. But high standards without emotional safety becomes self-attack. So let's bring this into dance. Imagine you walk out of an audition and immediately replay everything. I missed that count. My face dropped. She was stronger than me. They probably noticed my weight. I should have trained harder. That is the judge. Now, notice something important. The judge does not analyze for improvement. The judge analyzes for identity, and it turns a mistake into a character flaw. It turns feedback into a verdict. It turns one performance into this is who you are. And that is psychologically dangerous. Research in performance psychology shows that athletes who engage in harsh self-criticism after mistakes actually perform worse in subsequent attempts. Why? Because self-criticism activates threat response. When your brain feels threatened, it prioritizes protection over performance. You tighten, you overthink, you hesitate, you lose your flow. Now compare that to a growth mindset, where research shows that people who view failure as information rather than identity improve faster and recover quicker. That's the scientist. The scientist doesn't say, I'm bad. It says that approach didn't work. The scientist separates performance from identity, and that separation is everything. Now, let's bring this into motherhood, because the judge here gets brutal. You lose your patience one afternoon, the judge says, you're a bad mom, you're failing. Other moms handle this better. You should be more patient. You're messing up your kid. The scientist says, okay, I was overstimulated. I hadn't eaten. I've been on the edge all day. The strategy didn't work. What would help next time? Do you see the difference, right? The judge makes it personal. The scientist makes it informational. One attacks and one adjusts. And here's the deeper layer. The judge feels productive. That's why we keep him around, because it feels like accountability. It feels like responsibility. It feels like standards. But there's a difference between accountability and shame. Shame says, I am the problem. Accountability says that action didn't work. Psychologically, shame shuts down learning. Curiosity expands learning. And that's not just motivational language. Self-comparison research consistently shows that people who respond to mistakes with curiosity and understanding are more likely to take corrective action than those who respond with harsh self-criticism. Why? Because when you don't feel attacked, you don't have to defend. The judge creates defensiveness. The scientist creates adaptability. Now let's talk about body changes after motherhood, because you look in the mirror and the judge says, you should be further by now. You used to look better. Why can't you get it together? You don't have discipline. But this scientist says your hormones have shifted. You're sleeping less. You haven't trained consistently. What small variables can we change? What experiment can we run this week? One creates shame spirals, the other creates momentum. And here's what I've been noticing in my own life. When the judge is leading, I procrastinate more. When the judge is loud, I avoid things. And when the judge is dominant, I hesitate to post, to audition, to try. Because if I fail, the attack is coming. But when the scientist is leading, I experiment more. I take more action. I detach from the outcome. Because data cannot threaten identity. And that shift alone changes your relationship with growth. Let's get practical. What does the judge sound like in your everyday life? I should be further. I always mess this up. This is embarrassing. I'm not cut out for this. They're ahead of me. I'm too late. I missed my window. Notice the absolutes, right? Always, never, should, too late, not enough, right? The scientist does not use absolutes. It uses questions. What happened? What worked? What didn't? What's the next small move? What variables can we adjust? That is cognitive reframing in real time. Instead of interpreting failure as identity, you interpret it as information. Now, I want to talk to you about imposter syndrome, because dancers experience this, and I've experienced this a lot recently, very much. And moms experience this, but also entrepreneurs experience this as well. The judge says, you don't belong here. You're not as good as you think. And the scientist says, new environments feel uncomfortable. Growth feels unstable. Skills improve with repetition. What experience can I gather? One reinforces fear, the other reinforces process. And here's something that changed everything for me. The judge expects perfection. The scientist expects imperfection. The judge thinks mistakes mean you're unqualified, and the scientist expects things to go wrong because that's how experiments work. If you're rebuilding after motherhood, after being away from dance, after burnout, expecting perfection is self-sabotage. Expecting imperfection is strategy. Because if you expect mistakes, they don't threaten you, they inform you. Now, let's bring this into social media, because you post something vulnerable and doesn't perform well, the judge says, well, that was stupid. Don't post that again. No one cares. But the scientist says, timing, hook strength, topic relevance. What can I test next? One shuts down, but one builds skill. And this is especially important if you are building a brand, rebuilding your body, rebuilding your identity. If the judge leads, you quit early. The judge wants one perfect attempt. The scientist expects many imperfect attempts. And that alone changes your timeline. Now, let's go even deeper into this. Why does the judge even exist? It's protective. It believes that if you criticize yourself first, it can prevent outside criticism. It thinks that shame equals safety. If I tear myself down first, no one else can. But that's a false strategy because self-attack doesn't make you stronger. It makes you cautious. And caution is not growth. Curiosity is growth. So how do you practically shift from the judge to the scientist? Well, here's 5 tangible moves that you can start taking. I want you to start changing statements into questions. Instead of, I'm terrible at auditions, ask, what part of auditions trigger me the most? Separate identity from performance. I performed poorly instead of I performed bad. And expect mistakes before you begin. Go into training assuming it won't work. Debrief without emotion first and list the facts before the feelings. And then speak to yourself like you would a dancer, you would a coach. You would never tell your students she's hopeless. So why are you telling that to yourself? So here's a story. I had a week recently where I felt like I was failing at everything. Work was just behind, the house was a mess, patience was running real thin, and my body just felt off. The judge was really loud. You're dropping the ball. You should be managing this better. You're not balancing well. And I caught it. I switched. I went into scientist mode. Sleep has been low, workload increased, movement decreased a little bit, and support was limited. So what's the experiment? Earlier bedtime, shorter workouts, one priority day, and low expectations are temporary. Okay, not shame, not strategy. And within a week, that energy shifted. Nothing dramatic changed, just the voice that was leading. And that's the power. The judge makes you feel behind, but the scientist helps you move forward. And I want to say this clearly. The goal is not to eliminate the judge. The judge has value. It can signal standards. It can highlight misalignment, but it cannot lead. It cannot be the CEO. It's a consultant, okay? This scientist is the leader. This scientist keeps you adaptive. This scientist keeps you resilient. This scientist builds confidence through evidence, not emotion. And confidence built through evidence is sustainable. So here's what I want you to notice this week. When you mess up, when you feel behind, when you start to compare, when you feel like quitting, pause. Ask yourself, who's talking right now? The judge or the scientist? And if it's the judge, don't fight it. Just say, thank you, noted. Scientist, it's your turn, okay? That shift alone changes identity because identity is built through repetition. If you repeatedly let the judge lead you, you build an identity rooted in shame. And if you repeatedly let the scientist lead, you build an identity rooted in growth. And growth is stable. Now, let me ask you something even deeper. Who would you be in 6 months if you let the scientists lead 80% of your decisions? How much would you try? How much would you experiment? How much less would you spiral? How much more would you build? Because the truth is, you're not behind. You're in process. And process requires data, not drama. And there's something deeper we need to talk about right here because the judge doesn't just randomly appear. The judge was built, and most of us built her young. The judge formed in environments where approval equaled safety, where performing well meant being praised, where getting good grades and making the team, keeping the house together, being the good one bought attention and validation. So the judge believes she's protecting you. She thinks that if she keeps you sharp, hyper-aware, self-correcting, then you won't be rejected. She thinks criticism equals preparation. And this is especially strong in motherhood because motherhood feels like high stakes. You don't want to mess your child up. You don't want to fail them. You don't want to repeat generational patterns. So the judge becomes louder, more vigilant, more intense. You shouldn't have snapped. You should be more patient. You should be more present. You should enjoy this more. You should be further by now. Notice how much the judge says should. And should is almost always shame dressed up as responsibility. Now, let me tell you about a moment recently. It was a completely normal afternoon, nothing dramatic, right? Just one of those days where everything felt like it was too much. My son was overstimulated. I was overstimulated. The house was loud. I had work on my mind. And I felt myself getting short, snappy, and impatient. And the moment I walked out of the room, the judge showed up immediately. You handled that wrong. You created negative patterns. You need to be calmer. What if he remembers this? You're not regulated enough. And I felt it physically. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, and I felt like I failed. Now pause there. That reaction, that's not growth. That's a threat response. When you attack yourself, your nervous system doesn't think, great, let's improve. It thinks we're unsafe. And when your nervous system feels unsafe, it either shuts down or goes into hyper control. Neither produces sustainable growth. So I stopped. I shifted into scientist mode. Okay, what happened? Low sleep, high stimulation, no break all day, work pressure in the background. What's the data, right? I need transition time. I need food earlier. I need 10 minutes alone before dinner rush, right? That shift changed everything. And the behavior still needed adjustment, but the identity did not need attack. And that's the part most people miss. The scientists still adjust behavior. It just doesn't assassinate identity. There's research from Dr. Kristen Neff on self-compassion that shows people who practice self-compassion after mistakes are actually more motivated to improve than those with harsh self-criticism. Why? Because self-criticism creates avoidance. Self-compassion creates resilience. And the judge says you're failing, but the scientist says you're learning. And that difference determines whether you spiral or grow. So let's zoom out to identity shifts, right? After motherhood, your identity changes, your body changes, your schedule changes, freedom changes, and your priorities change. And when identity shifts, the judge gets loud because stability feels threatening. You're not who you used to be. You've lost yourself. You should bounce back faster. You shouldn't be struggling this much. But here's the truth. Identity is not discovered, it's engineered. And you don't engineer something perfectly on the first attempt. You test, you adjust, you refine, you repeat. That's scientist energy. So instead of asking, who am I now, in a panic, ask, what am I building now? That one shift removes shame because motherhood isn't a loss of identity, it's a reconstruction of it. And reconstruction requires experiments. Some experiments work, some don't. And none of them define your worth. Now let's make this even more practical. Imagine this week you want to try something new. Maybe you start training again. Maybe you launch something. Maybe you speak up. Maybe you set a boundary. Maybe you rest more. Maybe you stop over functioning, okay? And it doesn't have to go perfectly. The judge will say, see, you can't do this. But the scientist will say, interesting. That variable just needs to be adjusted. One voice ends the attempt, but the other continues it. And that difference between stagnation and evolution. And that's something very powerful. You don't have to eliminate the judge. You just have to demote her. Okay. The judge can sit in the room, but she doesn't have to run the meeting. When the judge speaks, you don't have to argue with her either. You just gather the data. Oh, that's insecurity. Oh, that's fear. Oh, that's comparison. And then you ask the scientist, what's actually true about this? Because growth doesn't require shame. It requires repetition. And repetition only happens when you feel safe enough to try. So this week, I want you to practice something simple, okay? When you catch the judge mid-sentence, literally say out loud, scientist, interrupt it, okay? Redirect it, reframe it, and watch how your body responds. Because the voice you let lead becomes the identity you build. And if you're rebuilding yourself right now, after baby, after burnout, after disappointment, you need curiosity more than criticism. You need experimentation more than evolution. You need resilience more than perfection, because perfection is the lowest standard. You will never reach it. And the woman you become is building by the voice you practice. So choose wisely. There's one more layer to this that I don't think we talk about enough. The judge feels powerful. That's why we let her take the lead. The judge feels sharp, controlled, disciplined, responsible. She feels like the adult in the room. And the scientist can feel soft, curious, uncertain, slower. And when you're a high achiever, especially ones who used to perform well, slowing down feels threatening, because you built your identity on being capable. So when you make a mistake, it doesn't just feel like a mistake. It feels like a crack in your identity. And motherhood amplifies that. Because before motherhood, you could control your output more. You could control your schedule. You can control your training, your results, your image, your rhythm. But after motherhood, you can't control everything the same. Sleep is unpredictable. Energy fluctuates. The body has changed. Your time isn't fully yours anymore. So the judge tries to regain that control back. She tightens the standards, she increases the criticism, and she raises the bar. And here's the irony. The tighter she grips, the more exhausted you become. And exhaustion fuels more mistakes, which fuels more judgment, which fuels more exhaustion. And that cycle is so brutal. And so many moms live inside this loop quietly, trying to hold it all together, trying not to drop everything, trying not to lose themselves, trying not to fall behind. But identity is not something you lose. It's something you evolve. And evolution is messy. There is no clean version to becoming. There is no graceful way to grow without wobbling. And the scientist understands that. The scientist expects to wobble, right? The scientist knows that instability is part of expansion. When babies learn to walk, they fall constantly. We don't say, oh, you're not cut out for walking. We say, try again. But somewhere along the way, we stopped giving ourselves that grace. We started expecting walking level mastery in brand new seasons. That's unrealistic. If you are rebuilding your body, rebuilding your confidence, rebuilding your business, rebuilding your marriage rhythm, rebuilding your identity, you are in learning mode. And learning mode requires experimentation, not evaluation. And the next time you feel behind, ask yourself, behind who? According to what timeline? Based on whose expectations? because most of the timelines we judge ourselves on are against others who were never ours to begin with. And once we release that timeline, we give ourselves permission to grow. And that's where real confidence forms, not perfection, but from repetition without self-abandonment. And that is what I want for you. Not a silent judge, but a stronger scientist. Because the woman you are becoming does not need harsher standards. She needs safer growth. So I want to know, where does the judge show up for you the most in your life? Is it your body? Is it auditions? Is it motherhood? Is it social media, your business? Tell me in the comments, where does the judge get loud for you? And tell me one area this week where you're choosing to let the scientist lead instead. So, of course, if this video resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed because we're building something powerful here. Identity from the inside out. And be sure to comment this emoji just so I know that you stay till the end. But always remember, you are stronger than you think.